Welcome one and welcome all to this Season 13, Episode 12 of Ubuntu Podcast. This week we're going to discuss, should Ubuntu be made into a rolling release? We have some gooey love and all your wonderful feedback. And joining me this week, it's the return of Joe Ressington.
Hello, excellent friend.
Hello, Joe. It's good that you've picked up on all the Ubuntu podcast memes. You fit right in around here. And my best friend, Mark. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Also best friend.
We sound like Smashy and Nicey when you and I do it. It doesn't really. Hey, great mate. So, Mark, what have you been up to recently?
Well, I was doing some socially distanced shopping in Lidl, and in the random bit in the middle of the shop where they dump a load of stuff, I found a nice new monitor. Really?
What, in the sort of the void, in the bit that nobody understands why it's there?
Yeah. I was wandering along and I saw a box which said Asus 24-inch monitor on it, and I thought I could use one of those.
Was it between some flip-flops and a snorkel?
Exactly.
Was it the only one?
It was the only one left, actually. Yeah.
And I assume it was a bargain?
It was a bargain. I even checked online to make sure it was in fact a bargain and not just
on your phone whilst you were in the shop.
Yes, I had one hand on it and one hand on my phone. So now my home working setup has been considerably improved over my previous 19-inch monitor.
Is this just a 1080 then, or is it 4K or anything fancy?
1080. I've upgraded from 1440 by 900, so 1080 is plenty.
Right. So I suppose, just for cultural reference, we should explain to people outside of the UK that Lidl is a cost-conscious supermarket that has a curious centre aisle which is full of random items of interest. Is that like a fair description of what the middle aisle of Lidl is all about?
Around the outside is all of your usual supermarket food and stuff and toiletries, and then in the middle is just whatever they could bring in cheap, which could be anything from, DIY equipment to flip-flops and clothes, as Joe says, to food, fishing tackle. You name it. And on this glorious day, a cheap monitor for me.
Wonderful. Well, there we go. That's I remember when they used to have like the occasional PC with SCART connectors on the back instead of VGA. It was like really weird. Like in the late 1990s, I can remember seeing those down there. But yeah, it's an interesting place to shop for sure.
Yes. Oh, Martin, what have you been up to?
I have been buying new male grooming products.
Hold on, this isn't a sponsorship spot, is it?
No, it's not a sponsorship spot, but it is a lifestyle change for me.
And what are your new male grooming products? Dare I ask, which part of your body they groom?
They groom my face, and I believe I have purchased a Gillette Fusion 5 Pro Glide Power 2 Ultra
Plus.
Is it any good?
Actually, it's the best shave I've ever had. Despite the ridiculous name, it isn't quite all of those words, but it is most of them. Maybe not in that order, but yes, I have a new razor, and it jiggles and it wiggles and it shaves all over my face. It's wonderful.
That sounds terrifying.
No, it's good. It has a AAA battery in it, and you can make it vibrate, which apparently makes for a smoother, closer shave.
Wow.
I sound like a commercial now. That wasn't my intention, but after 20 years of using the same brand of razor, I did some research and learned that if you're not going to slice your face off with one of those, barber single blade things, this is the best game in town after, a couple of decades of shaving evolution. So I've invested in that. And I have to say, my daughter's very happy with my, baby soft cheeks now. Let's move on from this Power Plus Pro Glide Fusion 5 Ultra silliness and get on with the rest of the show. So this week, we thought we would discuss how would we make Ubuntu a rolling release, and also pose the question, should Ubuntu be a rolling release? So I'm going to start by asking, why would Ubuntu want to do this?
So that you can get all of the latest software and not use snaps.
Well, I'm not sure that that's quite, I don't think those two are mutually exclusive. I mean, you could have it get all the latest software and snaps would be the mechanism to do that. But I suppose from the user's point of view, having the latest software is the reason that people would want it. But from Canonical's point of view, the community maintaining its point of view, you've only got one version to support, I suppose, is the obvious advantage to doing a rolling release rather than having the current release and the last long-term release and possibly the last long-term release before that and the last development release and having to keep them all going at once.
Well, and the LTS before that with the paid support.
Yeah.
Not just the LTS before that, but, we're supporting back to 12.04 at the moment.
Yeah.
So I hear those arguments. I utterly reject all of them. So it's interesting. So you may remember around Christmas time, Ubuntu released a user survey, which was really open-ended questions to really sort of canvass people what they, wanted to see in Ubuntu, what they wanted to change, what they liked, all that sort of thing. And it was specifically designed not to be a yes, no, 1 to 5 kind of thing. It was all free-form text entry. And in the end, we contracted with an AI ML organization that can analyze all of that human input and turn it into common themes. What was interesting about that from my point of view is that one of the themes that emerged is lots of people asking for Ubuntu to be a rolling release, or at least saying Ubuntu should be a rolling release. Mm-hmm. But it was digging into the reasons why that were more revealing than just the request, because why would you want Ubuntu to be a rolling release? What's the benefit? And a lot of people responded with they wanted, as you say, the latest applications, and they also wanted current hardware support.
Right.
And I think Ubuntu is delivering both of those things without having to be a rolling release.
Yeah, this is something that has come up with my conversations with Dan from Elementary. He said that people often will say to him, I want X, Y, and Z, but then really they don't want X, Y, and Z. They want to accomplish something, and instead of them thinking they know the correct way to do it, actually there's probably a better way to do it that will accomplish the same goal. And in this case, obviously, it always comes back to snaps and the hardware enablement kernel, because my experience with buying at the time a relatively modern Intel 9600K was that even with the LTS, with the relevant updates, it was supported. And then when I got the hardware enablement stack, it was even more supported. And so I've been able to stick on 1804, and I'm still talking to you on 1804 now. And then once I go beyond that, it'll be fine. But it seems to me that you do have it right with Ubuntu. And you do have the interim releases for people who want to get the newer stuff. But then you've got that having to update every 6 months potentially. And if you're on an interim release, you've only got 9 months of support. So I can see both arguments for it. But I think ultimately I do come down on the LTS and interim releases rather than rolling.
Okay, so it sounds like we've decided that it shouldn't be a rolling release. But imagine that we did want it to be a rolling release.
So I would say to you, you can operate Ubuntu as a rolling release. And I'm not just going to talk about, snaps and the HWE kernel as Joe has just outlined. If we think about people that run Arch Linux, by and large, I think we can characterize that group of people as somewhat advanced Linux users, mm-hmm. right? They know what they want from a Linux distribution, and they're prepared to piece it together from themselves. Well, if you apply that to Ubuntu, then all you have to do is never install Ubuntu, or install it once, and then you just continually release upgrade to the next version. So Joe talks about updating every 6 months, but actually you never update. You're just continually updating. Let's imagine that you installed 1804 on day of release, and then a week later you release upgrade to 1810. You are now following that rolling development period of 1810 all the way up to final release. And then a week after 1810 came out, you release upgrade to 1904, and you now ingest all of those updates that take you up to the April release of 1904, and then you do the same to take you all the way through to 1910, and the same again. And this computer that I'm talking to you on now, I originally installed with 1710 and has ridden that wave all the way through from 1710 to where we are today. And I'm running effectively, well, I didn't update for a couple of days, but I'm running a version of 2010 effectively now.
So what you're talking about there sounds a bit of a buyer beware approach to a rolling release. So you're saying, the packages are there, you can install them if you know what you're doing, but if it breaks, you're kind of on your own. So would there be a way of having a rolling Ubuntu release which would also be well supported?
Well, in some respects, I say well supported. It's reliable by the nature of the way that, everything that comes into the Ubuntu archive that's critical to the operation of the operating system has to go through some sort of release management process. So it's not, you do get, a fire hose of updates, but they are gated by some quality assurance before they land on user systems.
But wasn't one of the daily images of Ubuntu just before 2004 broken and failed to boot or something?
Yeah, but that's for people that are installing at that point in time, as opposed to people that are running it.
So if you'd upgraded to that point on a kind of daily basis or whatever, then it would have booted, is what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Although we did have one which was like a hard fail through an update, and those do get through occasionally because you can't test for every integration possible, but that's true of every rolling release.
Well, yeah, so you have to keep an eye on the blog essentially, or the mailing list, and make sure that you're not upgrading when you shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's true. But, this is part and parcel of rolling releases, and why, generally speaking, our customers don't want a rolling release model. They want guaranteed, this is when the releases come out, and stability guarantees and support guarantees that, this thing is now going to work for the next 10 years.
Yeah. Mark, are you on 2004 yet?
I am on my laptop, but not on my gaming machine.
Yeah. And the machine I'm talking to you on, as I said, 1804, albeit is Ubuntu, and not much tends to change. Although actually the 1804 to 2004 is quite a big change for Ubuntu with GTK 3 and all that. But are we typical users? I suppose we don't have enough data to work it out whether we really are. But yeah, you actually do have data, Martin, don't you? Showing that is it 20 times the number of people stick to LTSs versus the interim releases?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an accurate 20 times, but it is many, many orders of magnitudes of people stick with the LTSs. And anecdotally, you can see that in the community, right? We have Telegram channels for our respective podcasts, and you will quite often see people, maybe we talk about, because, I work on this stuff. I'm excited for people to experience the new stuff that's in, say, 2010 or 1910. And people are like, absolutely not. I'm speaking to you, Stuart Langridge. I only run LTS releases. That sort of, LTSs are golden is a really entrenched, ingrained thing within the Ubuntu community. And rightly so. People are right to trust the LTS releases. They get an awful lot of attention and support and QA and refinement over their lifetime. If you're installing 1804 today, you are guaranteed a pretty rock solid experience.
Yeah, and hence why PPAs were popular for a long time and still remain popular, and obviously STAPs that we keep coming back to.
Yeah, I mean, I've got several machines here that I've upgraded through multiple releases. And I have to say, obviously I work on Snap, so there's going to be a little bit of bias in what I say. But it is really nice when I've got a system with a whole bunch of applications installed of Snaps. The machine behind me, I set up for my daughter and I hadn't booted it. It was running 1810. I think when I booted it a couple of months ago. So I had to sort of forcibly upgrade it from 1810 all the way through 2004. And it had a whole load of snaps on it, and none of those were a problem because those are self-contained and isolated. They don't care what version of Ubuntu they're installed on. They just updated, refreshed, and worked. But all of the other stuff I'd got on there, not necessarily the stuff that was in the archive, but a few things I'd got from PPAs and things like Steam and what have you, I had to sort of poke about and cajole and sort of, encourage to continue working after I'd gone through that series of upgrades. So, snaps help aid that I want to roll my applications on a stable base.
Another group that it occurred to me that perhaps wouldn't look so kindly on a rolling release would be OEMs. I mean, I guess when an OEM decides to sell Ubuntu on a machine, there's like a verification process, possibly certification with Canonical. If you were on a rolling release, would you have to do that like every week to make sure what you're selling was still okay?
Yeah, the factory images of Ubuntu that the OEMs ship on their devices are factory certified. It's not a hand-wavy certification process. It's a proper certification process. And certainly if you look at the big OEMs, they will make those factory images one time and they won't revisit them. So they'll make their factory image for their device for 1804, and that is the image that will go out on every laptop that's sold with Ubuntu for the lifetime of that device until they refresh it with new hardware, and maybe that comes around to rebase, on a new LTS release.
So what do we think then? Should people just go elsewhere if they want a rolling release, or could this be the future of Ubuntu?
Well, it seems like Martin's outlined that you can have the best of both worlds. If you want to have, or the best of three worlds, if you want to have LTS to LTS like I do, you've got that. If you want the interim releases, you've got that. And if you want to be bleeding edge, there is a way to do it. So it's almost like there kind of is a rolling release for those who want it, for the brave souls who fancy it. But otherwise, the rest of us can just stick on our main releases.
What I'd be interested to know from our listeners is, what do you think? Do you think Ubuntu should be a rolling release, or are you happy with sticking with an LTS for a couple of years and then dealing with upgrades after a couple of years? And do you feel like snaps fill a gap in all of that? And do you know what HWE and hardware enablement means? And if not, let us know at show@ubuntupodcast.org and we can fill in that information for you. And with that, let's move on to some GUI love.
That GUI love. If there's an app that you've been using that you just have to tell everyone about, email your GUI love to show@ubuntupodcast.org.
So last episode, I mentioned that the glorious ANSI Alien Attack is being ported to Scratch.
Yeah.
And you may remember one of the highlights of ANSI Alien Attack was I went to great lengths to make it work with an Xbox 360 controller and a Steam controller. By the way, ANSI Alien Attack was implemented in Bash. So, this was like overkill of, epic proportions. And while my daughter and I were working on porting it to Scratch, she was saying, well, I remember we used to use controllers to do this, in the old version. So I did a bit of looking around and I found there's a bit of software in the archive called Anti-Micro.
Aha.
And it is wonderful. So you can just apt install Anti-Micro and it enables you to map keyboard buttons and mouse controls to gamepad controls so that you can play games that don't have any gamepad support using a gamepad or joystick.
Is this going to work with my £5 Amazon one that's totally unbranded?
Yep.
Excellent.
Yes, I used to use this when I first built my living room gaming PC before Steam for Linux was a thing, because Steam has this feature where you can map your controller to whatever your game needs, keyboard or mouse wise. But before all of that, I would just plug a GameCube controller in via a USB adapter and use Anti-Micro to map to whatever games I was playing.
Yeah. Scratch games are obviously quite simple in most cases. So I've got some Konix Speed King joysticks from the 1980s with USB adapters to turn them into, something that we can use on a modern computer, which is ideal for Scratch because it's just up, down, left, right, and fire. So I was able to remap those to get the joysticks to work. And my daughter and I spent 2 days basically programming and playing this game and really working this, and it worked brilliantly. Now, my understanding is that Anti-Micro hasn't been maintained for a couple of years. And although it's not in the archive, there is a continuation of the project called Anti-Micro X. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes to their GitHub repository. But both of those projects are fantastic. So if you've got something you want to play, maybe like an old DOS emulated game or something like that, it's remarkable just how much stuff you can bind to, your gamepad and get it to go. It was a real gold find as far as I was concerned. And with that, we'll move on to the feedback.
There's always room for more feedback. On our website, each episode has its own comments, so post yours on ubuntupodcast.org.
And now it is time for all your wonderful feedback. We can't read it all out, but we do read it all. First this week, Ian Forbes emailed us.
I'm expecting my house to be hooked up to a 250 megabit up and down fibre to the premises in June. This should improve the suboptimal 1 bar of 4G SIM we currently enjoy. Therefore, hearing about Martin's travails gave me some good pointers of possible pitfalls. I realised that I need a better router for starters.
Yeah, so the router that I bought was probably a little bit of self-indulgence on my part. I think we could have achieved the same improvements without me replacing the router, but my wife doesn't listen, so it's fine. I just wanted a new router.
If it doesn't look like a robot spider, you're not interested.
Indeed. But yes, so Bryce Mitchell also emailed us.
Have you considered Mocha adapters that allow you to run your network over coax cable? I use them in my network and get close to a full gigabit between them. Lon.tv has great videos about them on YouTube. They recently released 2.5 gig versions. So this is interesting. This is if you've got like TV aerial sockets in your walls, you can run your network through those rather than through the power.
Today I learned, and I'm very excited about this because this is something that could prove very useful in old buildings.
Yeah, I never even thought about this because I don't actually have TV sockets in my house. But yeah, it's a neat idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'd never heard of these. I'd be interested to know if our listeners, this is brand new information or not, because it was to me when I looked at this after we got the email from Bryce. But no, I hadn't considered it because I didn't know they existed. And I'm tempted to buy. They're not all that expensive either. I looked on Amazon. They're not super expensive, but I'm tempted to find out because everywhere that I want to connect two or more devices together, they're basically for media. So there are coax connections, in the wall there. I just don't remember if they all interconnect correctly in the loft. So I might have to get up in the loft and check that out. But certainly interesting stuff.
Yeah, Mocha.
Rachel Hoots also emailed us.
On the subject of talking about Ubuntu, it really bothers me to see YouTube videos or blog comments about how Ubuntu sucks and everyone should be using some other distro, or even that there's no point in using Linux at all and everyone should use Windows. I've been seeing a lot of this kind of assertion lately, and I feel like it misses the point. I use Ubuntu because it works, I trust it, I know how to use it, and the same can't be said for other operating systems that I've tried. It's just so frustrating to see people throw hate at operating systems seemingly without realizing that if you use Linux at all, you probably have a good reason for choosing the distribution that you use.
I think there's probably a whole episode's worth of discussion in people throwing hate on YouTube.
Yeah, and people going for clickbait titles about it and stuff, even when they don't really hate it.
Yeah. Rachel makes a good point. And yes, I think, Mark, we could definitely have a segment around this topic, not just people throwing hate at Ubuntu, but, you know, as a tribe of Linux users, we shouldn't be throwing shade at other Linux users and the choices that they make. You know, we are all Linux users. We've all made the right choice, in air quotes. We should not be trying to steal users from one distribution to another distribution. We should all be working together to sort of advance the adoption and use of the platform that we believe in. This whole infighting thing, I know from speaking to professional organizations who want to ship devices with Linux desktop pre-installed, how this looks to them and how it affects some of their decision making. It doesn't make us look good, and we really need to cut it out as a community. Dennis Burrows also emailed us.
Does the Groovy Gorilla have a nickname similar to Felicity for the focal fooser?
Gary.
Gary the Groovy Gorilla.
Yeah, Gary the Groovy Gorilla.
Excellent.
Oh, no. It's a bit like, you know, Gary, the, you know.
All right. Well, seeing as it's a bit about Ubuntu, you could call him Gerald the Groovy Gorilla.
That's a throwback and a half.
Yes, that is a deep cut, as they say.
So, Dennis, other than Joe's suggestions, no. And the main reason is that we don't have a Groovy Gorilla mascot yet. So Felicity's name only came around after the Focal Fusa mascot was unveiled, and then this name came to prominence within the community. I can only hope it happens again when the new mascot is unveiled later this year. Kuhns emailed us.
I think I remember in one of the episodes you said that you used AntennaPod as your podcast manager. AntennaPod is open source, and the lead developer is now working on version 2 of the app. It's an important update with lots of bug fixes and UI improvements. To honour this major step, we're now looking for a new logo and app icon. We would love to get the help of designers for this. We've published a request on opensourcedesign.net, and I was hoping you might be able to help by sharing our call. We have more details available over at antennapod.org/designbrief if anyone's interested. Now, I use AntennaPod, and I think it's great, and I hope that they don't change it in version 2, because it's great.
You can continue using version 1 or 0.1 or whatever you've wedged yourself on because you hate change.
They already changed it once, and I had to get used to that, so I'm sure it'll be great once it's changed.
But yes, we'll have links to those places where if you have graphic design skills and you would like to contribute to a project, then you can come and look at our show notes and find out where to get involved. So we've had an amazing response to our Patreon campaign. So thank you everyone who has pitched in and helped support us there. It's taken a huge weight off our shoulders and placed them squarely on Joe's, who's now responsible for producing our podcasts. How's that going for you, Joe?
It's going pretty well, actually. I managed to smash out the 2 or 3 that you had in your backlog pretty quickly. And this one will be a bit easier because I was there to hear all the flubs the first time round.
Yeah, it's no accident that we've invited you onto this one to ease the production processes. Anyway, thank you all. And if you haven't heard, we're running a Patreon because Alan, Mark, and myself don't have the time, interest, or inclination to edit podcasts anymore.
And possibly the skills.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe I should have led with that. Maybe I should have led with the skills. Yeah, we don't have the skills. And so in order to continue with timely releases of the podcast, we've started a crowdfunder. You can find more at patreon.com/Ubuntu podcast. And with that, we've had some feedback. So first, Dustin Nesbitt Jones emailed us.
I signed up for your Patreon and am happy to support the show. One request, though. Perhaps consider removing the minimum of £3. I'm sure you have lots of listeners around the world, and sometimes the currency conversion hurts.
Especially as they'll be adding sales tax very shortly on top of your contributions.
Right. So I think I should start by saying it's not a £3 minimum. When we recorded our little call to action episode, we said there were no tiers and there were no perks. But in order for Patreon to be happy with the way you set it all up, you have to have at least one tier. And I wasn't able to set a starting price of like $1 without it moaning at me. So it's $3. Because that's what they recommend, but there's nothing stopping you going in and changing that to 1, for example, or 2, or whatever you want to choose. So it's not a minimum, it's just a recommendation. But I know it doesn't look quite like that, but we can't control that. So sorry about that. I'll see what we can do to make that a bit more clear in maybe the description of the tier, to try and clear that up. And next, James Richardson emailed us.
Happy to support your works via Patreon. If it does turn out that there are extra funds, perhaps you could also help out the team who puts out the Ubuntu Security podcast. Maybe put it into other FOSS-related podcasts, but please, no ThinkPad-only podcasts.
So I think what we've said for now is that if we end up with a surplus, we'll sort of keep a bit of an extra surplus in case the contributions drop. But if we end up with a load of money left over at the end of the year, we'll probably discuss with the Patreons what they think we should do with it.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. We do know Joe and Alex from Ubuntu Security Podcast. I imagine if they weren't able to do what they were doing, self-funded, they would ask their audience to help. It complicates. So we've had to create bank accounts and, fill out tax forms and all the rest of it to do this. It complicates how we operate this if we have to start passing money to additional parties. So for my sanity, I would prefer to keep this as simple as possible. But if we do overshoot, we'll let the patrons know and find out a way of using the surplus in a responsible way that's agreeable to all those that have supported the show. And Torrin Doyle left a comment on our website.
Hey guys, could Canonical contribute a bit towards keeping the Ubuntu podcast show running, or do they already?
No, Canonical don't. The Ubuntu podcast is a community effort, despite the fact that Alan and I both work for Canonical. Neither of us did work for Canonical when we both first got involved in the podcast, of course. If any entity was to support the Ubuntu podcast, it could be the Ubuntu Community Fund. But that introduces a potential conflict of interests in that Alan and I are gatekeepers to awarding funds from the Ubuntu Community Fund to, organizations and individuals that request funding. So that's a little bit tricky for us. Although Alan and I both qualify because we're both Ubuntu members, you can see there's an obvious conflict of interests there. So potentially, yes. I hadn't considered approaching people to discuss that. Maybe, but I feel a bit awkward about that one. And finally, Wiz emailed ThinkPad Corner.
We can all agree that ThinkPads are great. I've owned 2 in the past and plan to purchase another in the future. But what's the deal with the memory? When buying my latest Ultrabook, I was looking for something with a good chunk of memory and ended up landing on the System 76 Lima Pro with 40 gigs of RAM, simply because the newest X1 Carbon could only be configured with a maximum of 16 gigs at 2133 MHz. Shouldn't excessive amounts of RAM with better speeds be an option more often by now? Some of us like to work on far too many things at once.
Yeah, this is a tricky one. So depending on the model of laptop you're looking at, you may find that the memory is soldered onto the main board, and therefore that is the limiting factor. On some of the older models of ThinkPads, you'll find that the advertised maximum RAM is actually well below what that chipset will support. So you can do some research on things like Intel Arc or using DMI decode to query the system to find out what it reports as the maximum DIMM size that it can support in each slot. I've got old ThinkPads that claim they can only support, 4 or 8 gigs of RAM, and I've, comfortably got 16 gigs into them. But if it's soldered on, then you're kind of stuck there. And certainly SO-DIMM speeds are well below what we see on the desktops, and that just is the fact of where we are with that sort of thing. And with that, we'll wrap up our feedback and just say thanks to Jonas Unra for his command line love selection, which is now safely deposited in our vault of love. And that is everything for episode 12 of Ubuntu Podcast. Thank you all for listening. If you would like to send your feedback, and we love getting your feedback, then please do send it to show@ubuntupodcast.org. And if you want to speak to us in between shows, you can do so on our Telegram channel, ubuntupodcast.org/Telegram. We have an amazing, epic, mega YouTube channel, youtube.com/ubuntupodcast. Everyone loves it. If you are looking for a fine VPS, then bitfolk.com is where you need to go. And Joe, thank you for joining us the last 2 episodes. Thank you for stepping in and helping us with our podcast production. And if you are looking for professional podcast production services, then head to joerest.com to find out how he can help you. Speak to you all in the next one.